Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of American Rambler. I'm your host, Colin Woodward. Thank you for listening to the podcast. On today's show, I have historian Emory Thomas, probably best known for his biography of Robert E. Lee, which has really been the last scholarly full-scale biography of General Lee. There's one coming out by Alan Gelzo that I think covers his whole life and has been taking a while and using a lot of primary sources, but Emory's was really the last one. I know there have been other biographies, but in terms of, Civil War historians who know what they're doing and have a good grasp of the historiography, Emory's was really the last one, and I've used it a lot in my own work. But that was not his only book. He's known for the book The Confederate Nation, which I read in grad school. He's also written a biography of Jeb Stuart, Bold Dragoon, and more recently, The Dogs of War, 1861, which came out 10 years ago for the sesquicentennial, just at the beginning. It's weird to think that that was 10 years ago. And I've been writing something, not sure what I'll do with it, if anything, kind of about the Civil War at 160 and what's been happening since the sesquicentennial, because I think now we, should take a moment to assess the Civil War and its legacy on race relations and secession and right-wing politics, more so than ever now. But the sesquicentennial was a big deal, obviously, the 150th, so a lot of books came out for that. I've been trying to rest my mind a little bit, but also wanting to write some new things, and so when I was on vacation in North Carolina, I had some ideas about talking about the Civil War at 160, so that's what I've been working on when I get a chance. But I had a long talk with Emory, who was a Frank Vandiver student at Rice University before getting his job at University of Georgia, Athens, a job he had for a very long time and is retired now, still lives in Athens, but he's a Richmond native and grew up in, not far from where I live on Northside, and still has a family home in between here and Tappahannock. So he does come back to Virginia. I just missed him. He was here during the summer, and I guess he spent a lot of COVID in Virginia. I wasn't able to talk to him face-to-face, but we got on Zoom and had a long discussion. So this is part one. We get up to when he's teaching at the University of Georgia. So part two will be coming up later in a week or couple of weeks when he talks about his books. But this is an interesting discussion about, it starts with Stratford Hall, where Robert E. Lee was born. But then we talk about grad school and his military service and his journey as a historian. He actually was a big football player for a while. He went to UVA as an undergraduate. So a true Southerner in a lot of ways with the football and then getting into the Civil War. And he made a lot of time for me. We had a nice chat. You obviously can find Emory Thomas's books online. Most, if not all of them, are in print. And actually, he talks about a book by Thomas Connolly, who was a military historian, wrote about Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army of the West. But I did not know this book, and it sounded really interesting. It's called Will Success Spoil Jefferson Davis? Came out in 1963. It's hard to find. I was able to get a copy on eBay for about $20, and I think it's supposed to be kind of a funny take in the spirit of Confederates in the Attic, which obviously came much later. But Connolly didn't live to be a very old guy, unfortunately, but he was fairly productive and seemed to have a pretty good sense of humor. So I ordered that book, and I'm looking forward to reading that. Not that I have time for books. It's getting so hard right now to read, especially when I have to read stuff for the podcast. But Emory mentions this book, Will Success Spoil Jefferson Davis? So I've checked that out, and maybe you might want to read it too if you're a Civil War person, but it is certainly something I had never heard of and couldn't find it on Amazon, and is not, I don't know, it's hard to find. I think I looked at a few libraries, they didn't have it, but someone had it on eBay, and it's a first edition, so I picked that up. So always learning new things, and was also trying to find out some more information about Thomas Connolly. And there's really not much out there. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page. There's a little bit on the internet, but seems like he was an interesting guy. So these are the rabbit holes I fall down when doing this podcast, and if you are a writer and researcher, you know what I'm talking about. Have yet another book to put on my shelf to read a little bit probably, and then I'll set it aside. I just finished the book Perv by Jerry Stahl. It took me years to finish that. I'm not sure why. It's a pretty heavy book, but it was well written and it was funny. I don't know. I set it aside and was on a tear a few weeks ago and said, okay, I got to finish this thing. So I finally finished that. But I just can never seem to catch up with the books. I'm not bragging. I know I read a lot, but I always wish I could be reading more. And it's just hard to get reading and writing done at the same time. All right, well, I've blathered on enough. Here it is, my talk with Emory Thomas, Part 1. Speaking of the Northern Neck, I'm going to be starting work at Stratford again, and I've been there for a number of years and had to go to Hampton, Sydney for 2, and so I'm back now. But obviously you've been to Stratford Hall before, right?
Yeah, I love Stratford Hall, and I think it's a wonderful facility. And I remember having a conversation with Paul Reber before he unfortunately died, and he pointed out that it's one of the great house museums and house sites of an incredible family of Virginia Lees, and with lots of stories. And he was fascinated and was there because he said it's one of the few places that were in effect untouched and needed help.
Yeah.
And he did some good things there.
Yeah, he had hired me. I mean, I didn't even start my first day of work before he died, and it was unfortunate for a lot of reasons, because I think, for one, the Lee Family Digital Archive was really kind of his baby, but we never got to work together. I know he'd been there for a number of years, and honestly, his successor did not do a great job. So they've got a new president now. I don't know if you kind of follow things there, but
yeah, I just sent him some money, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
And the new president is this very articulate woman, and she says she has some wonderful ideas. Emphasize the family, I think.
Yeah.
Which is and also the property. It's amazing the number of acres they have and the sites, the mill and things like that.
Yeah.
Which I have seen. Yeah,
it's still an area. I mean, it's obviously overwhelmingly rural still. So, there have been 20th century, 21st century intrusions on the property, but yeah, on the whole, you don't have to use your imagination too much to kind of be back in the 18th century. I mean, it's still...
Oh, no. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And one of my sons lives in Seattle, Washington, and he put a trip to Battlefield, Virginia, with me as host and guide in a charity auction. So I took, I think it was 4 or 5 14-year-olds and their parents, their fathers, to Virginia sites. And I said, we have to go to a plantation. If you're here from Seattle, Washington, you need to see a plantation. So we went to Stratford and had a wonderful time.
That's great. Yeah.
And I think one of the great attractions of Stratford is lunch. I mean, crab cakes and Virginia ham and biscuits, you cannot beat it.
Yeah. So
anyway, we had a wonderful time, and I got smart ass with the guide there and asked her about Black Horse Harry Lee, and she'd got into things that she wasn't supposed to talk about.
Yeah, he was something else. He kind of obviously ruined Stratford for the Lees. That he was the last Lee to live there, and
yeah,
I was able to write something about him for the Encyclopedia of Virginia, and I don't think there's an existing image of him, so I didn't really know what he looked like. But obviously, he left a lot of documents behind it. I mean, Black Horse he was obviously the black sheep of the family, and kind of a tragic guy, but very interesting. And I didn't know anything about him before I got to Stratford. And he was Robert E. Lee's half brother.
Yeah. And amazing story.
Yeah.
His relation with his daughter, stepdaughter, I guess it was.
Yeah.
I don't know, he's a fascinating individual and to me a great story. I mean,
yeah, there's a definite academic article in there on him. I didn't have time to kind of expand it out, but he was a writer and he died in Paris, and yeah, he had the scandal, and his wife was addicted to laudanum, and I mean, it was something out of a movie, really. But
and Robert E. and his brother tried to send her money and keep her going, but my guess is that she spent that on mind-altering substances and died a pauper.
Yeah, it was pretty sad, and I mean, it was Henry Lee IV, and he tried to get some jobs, and the Jackson administration didn't have any luck there, and really was just scandalized by it.
I mean, face it, he did the son of a great Federalist who's currying favor with Jackson, the supposed Democrat, and then he goes off and writes a couple of volumes on Napoleon.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many great stories with the Lees, and as you suggest with the tour guide, there's some things like you don't necessarily want to talk about because it doesn't make the Lees look so great, but it's part of the story. And for historians, that's really the good stuff. I mean, you kind of want to hear the Peyton Place scandals. Yeah.
Paul Nagel, I think, did a great job with the Lee family.
Yeah.
But I don't even think he went deeply enough and analyzed what made them great and what made them fools.
Right. Yeah, I think
and scoundrels.
Yeah, I think his papers are at Virginia Commonwealth University. I need to look at those, see if there's some, marginal notes or things, because I love, that's a great book, but I'd love to see sort of how he kind of put it together. And there's sort of some very subtle digs at the Lees in that book. But
yeah, well, he was Paul came out of Missouri, but
okay.
He really, his book on the Adams was those were his favorite folk, and he sort of saw the Lees as an interesting family, but definitely not in the same league with the Adamses. I don't know. He was at the Virginia Historical Society when he was doing a lot of that.
Okay.
And had access to really a trove of wonderful material. And he saw himself as not as a director, but as a writer in residence. And
yeah, you can't do that anymore.
No, and he proved it.
Well, yeah, I love that book, and I'm going to be using it a lot again when I start my work up. But
the only thing he did that was, I think, really important was to open up the reading room of the society, so that you didn't work in this cramped little space upstairs. You had, a major hall to work in, and it was a feature of the society. And of course, it's with Charlie Bryan's work. It was that society has become really, really fantastic. It seems to me.
Yeah, I worked there for a few years. Charlie was still there, and they're I don't know if you've been by there lately, but they've been doing a major renovation again, and the reading room and everything. I think should be ready in the spring. So I'm looking forward, because I go there a lot when I'm working on the Lees. I mean, as you well know, there's so much Lee material.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I love it. So I'm in Richmond, so I can hit the archives around here, but I'll be going back to Stratford. And you were born in you grew up in Richmond, correct?
Yeah, I grew up in Richmond. Lived there. I felt that I lived there until I was 18 and went off to Charlottesville to Mr. Jefferson's University.
Right.
But I went there to play. Here's my shtick. I have done, in my mind, the right things for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
I went to the University of Virginia to play football, and I recently decided that the first 22 years of my life were essentially conditioned by football. And the the desire to be in shape and to accomplish things as a football player, because that's the way you impress the chicks.
You're a good Southern boy, going that route. Yeah.
Went to Ginter Park Elementary School. Grew up on the north side of Richmond, where we had the reputation for stealing hubcaps. But and I knew some of those guys, but I did not run with them. I think the most significant thing I did in that respect was to sneak into an elementary school, get caught eating ice cream by the janitor who screamed at me and two other guys. Anyway, I went to Ginter Park Elementary School, Chandler Junior High School, which is no more. And it was it was an interesting place. It was a blend of, they're all white folks, but we had some interesting people. In some cases, if you were collecting for a paper route, you had to pay protection.
Oh yeah.
in order to complete your rounds.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then I went to Thomas Jefferson High School. Essentially, got thoroughly hooked on football.
Okay.
And my mentor coach, Charlie Cooper, was a graduate of the University of Virginia, and before he went in the Marine Corps in World War II, there wasn't much recruiting done. I mean, I flirted with going to Wake Forest, a couple of other places, but clearly I was going to Virginia because Charlie said that was a good place for me. I thought I could play football there, and I did. And I was going to get a, quote, good education, but I didn't know what that was about. As it turned out, I was, and this is, again, doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. There I was because I wanted to play football. And I was a history major because I got an A in history and a B in English. And I was in the honors program because you didn't have to go to class. You wrote papers.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be great fun because I could send fraternity pledges over to the library to pick up books and things. And this was the old days. There was an off season for football players. And we fraternized with other people in the university other than the football team.
Were you a big guy?
For the time.
Okay.
I mean, face it, now I couldn't play guard as I weighed about 2'5", 210.
Okay.
Which I still do, but unfortunately, the weight has moved around a lot, and I've lost 5 inches in height.
Really?
From a series of back, hip, and knee operations.
Oh wow! Were you 6 feet?
I was 6 feet tall.
Okay.
I'm now 5'7". I was 6 feet tall and weighed, like 205.
Okay. Well, that's a good size.
The guys we were playing against were essentially that size.
Yeah.
The guards were I don't know, somewhere between 200 and 210, 215. centers were usually a little bit bigger and played nose guard on defense. Tackles tended to be, as in big dumb tackles, they were 230, 240.
Okay.
And that was, you think of that, you cannot walk onto a college field nowadays and play guard unless you are over 300 pounds.
Yeah, no,
or at least nudging it.
Yeah, no, it's changed a lot, and I think like every sport now, everything's so specialized. So yeah, these roles that you're talking about, where guys are just kind of whoever was handy to kick the ball or whatever. Like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's real. That's almost like rugby. I mean, now it's the kickers are very specialized and all that, and really every sport now. I mean, watch baseball. It's just like everything is micromanaged. But I heard that you started to get kind of deep into Southern history. You read some C. Vann Woodward when you were at UVA. You want to talk about that?
Exactly. I became a Southern historian by when I read Burden of Southern History, which was an essay he wrote, and it became the title of one of his collection of essays, Vann Woodward. And I can remember sitting in the stacks of Alderman Library at Virginia reading The Burden of Southern History, and I said, yes, that is exciting stuff.
Yeah.
And that's that's who I am, and I want to find out. Well, one of my students said it best. I came here to study the reasons that I am what I am. She wanted to find out why she was as she was, and thought the way she thought, and had the values that she had, and that's why she wanted to study Southern history. And actually, she put it in better words than I ever did. In any event, I had a sort of an awakening there, and then so there I am. I came to Virginia to play football. I'm enlightened with Southern history, and so I decided I want to go to graduate school. I want to go to graduate school because I want to get married to a sweetheart with whom I'm still married. My first wife is my only wife, and she and I still have a great time together.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, what's the connection? I'm sorry, what's the connection between grad school and getting married? You just figured, like, I'm in for the long haul here. I need to kind of get some stability. You just didn't want to break up and go to school.
Yeah, it was a way to continue. Well, at the time, I thought I wanted to be a football coach.
Okay.
And but I wanted to go to graduate school as a kind of insurance, because I had an opportunity to do it, and it seemed to me that if I couldn't make it as a football coach, I could always go teach history somewhere.
Okay.
And I didn't know how the profession worked at the time, and it still does.
Yeah, I know. But, I don't know either.
Well, it changes a lot.
Yeah.
But, from year to year, actually. But anyway, at the time, there was a hue and cry about publish or perish. And I remember my honors thesis advisor saying, well, yeah, the people who publish books and articles have the best jobs.
Yeah.
And so it made a certain amount of sense to me. But anyway, I went off to graduate school to study mainly, and in part because I'd never been to Texas.
Okay.
And I had a chance to go to Rice, and I got an assistantship. This was in 1962. I got an assistantship that paid me the grand total of $1,950 per year.
Yeah.
And I was planning on living on that. That was, to me, insurance to get a PhD in history, to have that backup for being a football coach, and would allow me to marry Fran Tolliver, spelled like Virginians do, Taliafero. Not
Right.
pronounced Taliaferro, but Tolliver.
I think the North Carolinians pronounce it Taliaferro, though, don't they? If you meet a
Well, they probably do. I mean,
okay,
North
yeah.
Carolinians are like that.
But yeah,
Uh,
that was one of those names. That was one of those names I looked because I processed a collection at the VHS that was the Tolliver family, and at first I was
yeah.
like, "What is this? This is this is different."
Well, it's like going to Charleston and reading about the UGs, spelled Huger, UG.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. All right.
Yeah, the South Carolina has some weird names too. uh, but there's a rationale. Taliaferro started out in Italy, I guess, and migrated to Great Britain, and then wandered over to Eastern Virginia.
Okay.
Anyway, and somewhere while I guess they were in England, they changed the pronunciation without changing the spelling.
Yeah.
Anyway, Fran and I got married in the fall of in August of '62, and went off to Rice in a covered wagon, Volkswagen convertible.
Okay.
Pulling a trailer, and lived in a garage apartment of a really a famed botanist at Rice, Edgar Altenberg, who sent the first fruit flies into space. There was fruit flies apparently have a great capacity to adapt to their environments.
Okay.
And I think he wanted to see how they would do in no environment.
Well, I guess the space program was everywhere in Houston back then.
Yeah, Houston was an exciting place to be. I'm one of the most people really don't like Houston. I love it.
Yeah.
Because I was there just sort of at the end of the oil boom, and the wildcatters were still running around, and people loved to spend money. That had money.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed. I mean, I love that.
Yeah.
About them. We fell in with a couple of people in River Oaks. That was nice. And we had a really good graduate contingent of people working with Frank Vandiver, who was, at the time, Rice at the time was operated under the star system. They would hire somebody really, really good or potentially good, and he or she would be the engine that would make a department work and be attractive to graduate students and other faculty, junior faculty, and you build a department that way.
Yeah.
And Frank was the guy that was supposed to make Rice was in a position when it was transitioning between Rice University, which became from Rice Institute, which was a very technical engineering school. Actually, it started out as the product of William Harris Rice, I think that's his name, who was a banker essentially.
Okay.
And he established in 1910 a Institute of Higher Education for the benefit of males from Harris County, white males from Harris County, Texas, which is a pretty limited number of folks. But it grew and grew, and I was there when they were changing the will to include women, to include people of color, to charge tuition, because it had been free before.
Okay.
If you got into Rice, they could zap you on fees, but you didn't pay any tuition. And this worked for, they waived my graduate tuition. That's another reason I went. There I had another enlightenment, similar to reading The Burden of Southern History in the Alderman Library. I came out of one of Frank Vandiver's classes and walked out in the hall and just said to myself, well, I grew up in a locker room, so I said, holy shit, this is really exciting stuff. There was a great deal of intellectual viability in the study of the Confederacy of all places.
Yeah.
And so I became hooked. Frank sold me.
Yeah.
That Confederacy was an exciting, interesting place, and there were Southerners under stress of a war for their national existence did a lot of really exciting things that were, belied the mythology that Southerners are these hidebound conservatives who will never think about doing anything different. That, when Virginians change a light bulb, it takes two people, one to change the light bulb and one to say that they like how much they like the old one better.
Right. Right.
Frank Vandiver's Confederacy really was in opposition to the assumption of a conservative South that never changed.
Yeah. Now, did you know his work before you got there?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. I had not. His major work was a biography of Stonewall Jackson entitled Mighty Stonewall. Right. But I confess I had not read it before I went.
Sure.
I went primarily because they were nice to me in offering me early on. They were supposed to be in, I think, April 1st. You were supposed to be. Can start recruiting graduate students, and sometime in March, Rice wrote me and said, we would like to offer you an assistantship, and we'll pay you $1,950 a year, which at the time was not all bad.
Sure.
I also had an ROTC obligation to spend 6 months, or more likely 2 years, in the United States Army. And the normal thing was to get a delay from call to active duty, which was almost pro forma at the time, but suddenly it wasn't. They wanted to get people out of the Army who'd been called up because of a Berlin crisis. And in order to do that, they needed more officers coming into the Army. And so there was a delay in delays to active duty. And so I thought I might have to go right into the Army from undergraduate school. And Rice was very good about saying, well, let us know if you can come in the fall. And Emory University did likewise. They said, well, look, we'll work something out. You do what you need to do and let the Army decide what it wants to do. Well, I learned about bureaucracies. If you hang on long enough, they might change their minds. And in this case, the Army did change its mind and started offering delays to call to active duty when they had threatened not to. A graduate program in history was pretty far down the list of possible exceptions.
Yeah.
So I knew I was going to go in. Anyway, I didn't go in. I got a delay from call to active duty. And actually, because I'd been commissioned as second lieutenant, and I was in the Army Reserve awaiting call to active duty, you could do that until you had a degree. At that point, all bets are off, and you were going to get called into active duty. Well, another reason to go to Rice was that Rice followed the lead of Princeton and a number of other significant institutions in offering a 3-year PhD program. You didn't have to get a master's, and you could go straight through to get a PhD. not too many people did that. They usually took 4 and 5 years, but you got at least the opportunity to complete the degree, and you could complete the PhD as the initial degree instead of a master's, which would have opened the door to go in the Army.
Okay.
In any event, that was another reason to choose Rice. So I could I got in the Army later after my graduate experience, went into the Army as a first lieutenant rather than a second lieutenant because of the time I'd spent as a reserve second lieutenant. And while in the Army, I made captain.
Okay.
In part because they were slaughtering lieutenants right and left in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
Where, to my great fortune, I didn't have to go. Had I done so, I'd have been leading a platoon on a patrol in the night and been blown up by twingy stakes or enemy fire.
Yeah.
Because the lieutenants didn't do well.
Okay. Even though you were trained as artillery, right? Not infantry?
Right.
Okay.
I was in air defense and artillery. I had you got to quote choose your branch, and everybody chose military police because you could get a 6 months tour for that, but nobody got military police. So I put down infantry, figuring that a history major with a background in football, that I was surrendering to the obvious in becoming an infantry soldier, a beetle cruncher. And but I just threw, and you had to choose combat branch had to be 2 out of the 3 choices. So I just threw in artillery as,
Yeah.
I decided I didn't want to be in armor,
Right.
which was the other option, because you're in a tank and it's kind of confined in there, and that didn't sound like a good place to be.
Yeah.
So I got artillery, and then I got air defense artillery, which became a separate branch. It was infantry, armor, artillery, and now we had, well, when I went in, air defense artillery, which was to use missiles to shoot down enemy bombers. I defended Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio, against the evil empire, the Soviet Union.
Right.
As defined by Ronald Reagan. And we had Nike Hercules missiles with nuclear warheads. So it was serious business. However, it presupposed that an enemy, were coming in manned bombers.
Right.
Somebody figured out, probably while I was in the Army, that, hey, they're not coming in manned bombers. They're coming with ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
And we can't shoot those down with the hardware we have and the tactics we use.
Right.
In any event, our commanders kept saying, gentlemen, we're 15 minutes from combat, which is true. If the enemy came in a massive squadron of manned bombers, we would know from NORAD in about 15 minutes before they showed up that they were on the way. And I worked in a air defense and artillery command post in Wilmington, Ohio. Significance there was, here we were, Nike trash soldiers in a small town in Ohio known best for its Quaker college. So the Quakers are having to deal with trained killers.
Yeah.
Soldiers. And actually, one of the highlights of my career in the military was going to hear a lecture by J. William Fulbright, who was at the time the leader, a radical leader of the anti-war faction in Congress and elsewhere. And he came and told us about doves and hawks.
He was from Arkansas, right?
Yeah, he was a senator from Arkansas. And later in life, I secured a Fulbright grant to teach a lectureship in Genoa, Italy.
Nice.
So there's a connection there.
Yeah.
Anyway, graduate school was an eye-opening experience. I knew that history was really about what historians say it is, and that history changed a great deal, not so much because the past changed, but because the present changed.
Yeah.
And the questions we ask of the past change a great deal, and consequently, we need historians to be at the top of their game and answering those questions that the present asks of the past. I guess the best example of that is that when I was an undergraduate at the University of Virginia, the textbook in American history that we used was Morrison and Comminger, Samuel Eliot Morrison and Henry Steele Comminger textbook about the course of American history. In that textbook, the explanation of slavery was pretty muted.
Yeah, I bet.
It was, I think they even used the word Sambo, didn't have it all that bad, and that he, never mind she, but he liked to sing and dance and enjoyed life essentially when he wasn't working, which was oftentimes.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Anyway, that was in the textbook.
Right.
That by the time I was in graduate school, that was absurdity.
I just want to ask about Vandiver because I didn't know this till I was hearing this interview that you did, but Vandiver didn't even have a high school diploma. Is that right?
No, he did not. He was a maverick, a renegade.
Yeah.
Published his first academic article at age 16.
Wow.
He was homeschooled by his father, who taught math at the University of Texas.
Okay.
He grew up in Austin.
Okay.
He got into the master's program at Texas because he pointed out to the graduate powers that were that one of his books was on a suggested reading list in a history course being offered at the University of Texas. So that got him into the master's program, and he really loved UT.
Yeah.
He was something called a silver sword, I think. And I'm not sure what that was, but it was some honorary. That he was hot for the Longhorns. And then he went to LSU to do his PhD, and apparently got the only job that was available for an American historian. He got at the University of Washington University in St. Louis.
Okay.
And went from there to Rice and published the Jackson biography and other significant works. Rebel Brass, about the Confederate War Department.
Right.
And he got off into, while I was there, he went off to Queen's College, Oxford, with a Harmsworth lectureship, which was a very significant honor at the time. He was gone for a year. I lived in his house.
Oh.
I went from Edgar Altenberg's garage to Frank Vandiver's house because he needed somebody to house sit for him.
Yeah.
And he knew that Fran and I were in a garage apartment, and seemed responsible folks, and were married and all that. And indeed, Fran was pregnant with a love child,
Yeah.
so-called, because we brought him home on our first wedding anniversary.
Ah.
We brought him home from the hospital.
Okay.
He, poor dear, grew up as a child of a graduate student, and then later an Army brat, and then later an assistant professor. So he had all of those experiences, which meant that he became a journalist.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, how was Vandiver as a guy and an advisor? Was he supportive?
He was great.
Yeah.
He was wonderful. Whenever you thought you knew the limits of his mind, he blew you away with something you'd never even thought of.
Yeah.
We had one session, sort of a seminar that met weekly at his house. The first year I was there in graduate school, it's a second semester, I guess. And we thought we knew, Frank's point of views and whatever. And so he brings in a copy of Playboy with an interview of Malcolm X. And Malcolm X was really laying it on the honkies. And Frank read most of it to us.
Uh-huh.
And we had no idea that he knew anything about Malcolm X. We didn't know anything about Malcolm X at the time. And Frank is, a furlong or two ahead of us, ahead of popular culture.
Yeah.
In knowing stuff.
Well, I guess he was still kind of a young guy. I mean, he probably wasn't.
He was very young. He was, at one time, this is some irony, he had the contract to write the New American Nation series volume on the Confederacy, which was a significant series in American history at the time. And it was, some great works in American history were in that series, edited by Richard Morris and Henry Steele Commager.
Yeah.
They were giants in the field at the time. Frank had the contract to do the Confederacy volume. And while he was supposedly doing that, he wrote an op-ed for the Houston newspaper, the Chronicle, about the Astrodome, which was brand new, first covered up baseball stadium in the world.
Yeah.
And I remember going to a game, and it was 70 degrees inside, and outside it was 96 and pouring down rain.
Yeah.
So anyway, but Frank imagined, and this is while he's supposed to be writing something very serious, scholarly, but he imagined what happens in the Astrodome if the air conditioning and the whole ventilation system breaks down. Well, what happens is you have clouds forming.
Yeah.
From moisture, and bingo, you have the seventh game of the World Series, Astros versus Yankees. I guess at the time he fantasized they were in different leagues. And the air conditioning breaks down and clouds form, and you have the first rain out in an enclosed stadium.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's fashioning that as an op-ed.
Okay.
When he's supposed to be doing all this heavy stuff.
Yeah.
You could tell with Frank, and this, of course, graduate students are famous for this. What is the great man wearing today?
Oh, yeah.
If Frank was in a dark gray suit and a white shirt and a tie, you knew something serious was at hand. and that he wasn't going to be playing games.
Okay.
On the other hand, if he shows up in khakis and a polka dot shirt, he was ripe for all kinds of foolishness or telling stories.
Okay.
And but graduate students, and we were an interesting collection.
I bet.
We among our cadre was Thomas L. Connolly, who was later famous for attacking Robert E. Lee.
Right.
In a book called The Marble Man. Robert E. Lee and his image in the American society. We also had Bert Kaufman, who later wrote a bunch of significant books. Most recently, he wrote a wonderful book about what happens to presidents after they have been president, American presidents, that is. And he goes, it's kind of easy with Lincoln. You don't have any career after
right.
his presidency. But, with John Quincy Adams, for example, he makes a huge career for himself in the House of Representatives after he's president. Probably was more significant as a former president than a active one.
Yeah.
Anyway, Bert has written that. He wrote a good, an interesting book about Jimmy Carter. He and I disagree on Jimmy Carter, but Bert doesn't think much of him.
Okay.
As a president. I think he was very much underrated. But anyway, Tom Connolly, Bert Kaufman, John Wakeland became a significant historian at Catholic University in D.C. and later at Kent State, in Ohio. Let me think.
Were you the only Vandiver student among those, or was Connolly working with you?
No, Connolly was.
Okay.
Tom Connolly was. And, to show the Vandiver influence, Connolly's first book was a spoof on Civil War aficionados, fans, buffs.
Okay.
Called Will Success Spoil Jefferson Davis? A wonderful book about reenactors and all kinds of crazy people. And unfortunately, it rolled off the presses on November 22nd, 1963, which of course was the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
Right.
And consequently, it did not make it under everybody's Christmas tree that year. There were other things in people's minds, but that was Connolly's first book.
That's kind of ahead of its time, really. We're talking about the reenactors. I mean, if you want to talk about Tony Horowitz's book about the reenactors, that was very well received, but that's a lot later.
Yeah. Well, as I say, Connolly, he was really funny, and it's a great book that I am treasured to own. And I picked up a copy at a sale, and I was Tom and I remained good friends, and I pointed out that I had bought his book for 95 cents on sale at a bookstore, and preserved the price tag to show him. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, so you were working on your dissertation while you were stationed in Ohio? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I fooled around a lot with dissertation topics. I really wanted to write about Virginians in the aftermath of the war, that is, to follow the Woodward route into the New South. Vandiver, who had just done Will Holmes's biography of James K. Vardaman, the sort of progressive, rabble-rousing racist from Mississippi. Damn good book. But as a dissertation, Frank said that he said politics is the opiate of the asses. instead of the masses.
Right, right.
And he said he was awfully tired of politics. He wasn't going to do that, and he would pawn me off on another member of the faculty. And to me, that was ridiculous because I came there to study with Frank.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't even know it at the time, but it became quite obvious that that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I fooled around with the possibility of doing an image study of Jefferson Davis. Merle Peterson had just published The Jefferson Image in the American Mind about Thomas Jefferson's image and how his name is invoked and used in all manner of American culture. And I had a wonderful conversation with Merle Peterson in the Alderman Library at Virginia. I imposed upon him, and for 2 hours we talked about doing a Jefferson Davis image study. But then I realized that I wasn't going to live long enough to read all the stuff I would need to read and work on to do an image study of Davis. And so Vandiver had always wanted people to work on Confederate cities and the urban experience in the Confederacy. And so I said, okay, I give up. Let me do Richmond, because I supposedly know something about it, and I'm going there over Christmas, and I'll do the research, or begin the research in earnest this November. So I did what became the Confederate State of Richmond, a biography of the capital, a study of Richmond during the war.
Yeah.
It eventually got published by the University of Texas Press.
Yeah.
Supposedly it was my first book, but I also had, by the time it came out, I had done the Confederacy as a revolutionary experience. There was an editor there that was starting a series on new interpretations of American history, and this fit the definition of what he was trying to do. And he and I had a good time playing with it. And he said, "You're going to love the cover. It's got a neon red Confederacy. Well, it turned out to be the Confederate White House,
Okay.
but in a neon red."
All right.
So anyway, that was in some ways taking some of Frank's ideas and running them with them in some cases, the extremity. I suggested that the Confederates operated in many ways like the American radicals in the Revolution, that people like Edmund Ruffin and William Lowndes Yancey were like Sam Adams and Thomas Paine and people like that in whipping up a revolution. But once they had started the revolution, the people who had the most to do with instigating the revolution fade and become sort of window dressing, because the people who really make the revolution happen are the more conservative ones who are purposed with trying to build something rather than tear something down. So that in this case, Jefferson Davis sort of becomes the heir apparent of these radicals. And he almost by necessity has to do things like suspending the writ of habeas corpus, invoking the first draft law in American history, having the War Department essentially run, well, not only the war effort, but also the labor market, because in the draft law, every white Southerner was subject to the draft if you're over 18, and the War Department could offer exceptions. And
Right.
so if you worked in the Tredegar Iron Works, for example, that was a logical exception. If you were working in importing women's hosiery and corsets, odds are you were not going to get an exception and exemption, and you were going to serve in the Army, which was also a spur to volunteers, because if you volunteered, you could serve with people you knew, your neighbors, in a unit composed of people from probably your county or an amalgam of your region anyway. So, and some of those things.
Yeah.
Control of the economy, control of politics, really.
Yeah. And so you didn't really want to do military history per se at the start? Like,
no, because military history seemed to me to be, there was sort of I don't know, maybe there's a genealogy associated with historians, I think, there was then anyway. Confederate history was, the extremes were Bell Wiley at Emory University, and Bell was interested primarily in getting to the root of the factual experience. How many mules were there in the 4th Alabama Regiment? And how many of them survived from 1 year to the next?
Yeah.
And how much could a mule carry? And things like that.
Right.
Frank had a little bit more grandiose view. He wanted to know about strategy and the notion of how to, every day that the Confederacy survives it's winning, and it's the offensive defense. You are fighting on your ground on circumstances of your choosing, and the enemy is compelled to fight essentially your battle, or at least that's what the Confederates hoped.
Yeah.
And Frank was interested in grand strategy and things like that.
Well, it's interesting I mean, we've already been talking about it, but kind of your trajectory as a historian is so different from what a lot of people do now. I mean, obviously you finished your PhD in 3 years, and you kind of published your thought piece first on the Civil War and the Confederacy.
Yeah.
And then the dissertation comes next year.
Yeah, that's because Confederate State of Richmond went to a number of presses. It went to LSU first because they were at the time, premier publisher of Southern history. And they turned it down and said, this is not good urban history. And I didn't know what urban history was at the time. So I was trying to figure that out. And so I wrote I promised myself I was going to leave Houston with a draft of my dissertation, which I did. And I went to the library and sort of took over a huge table. Had my notes all over it and was pouncing from note to note and scribbling off and trying to write 5 pages a day, and did primarily.
Yeah.
I had a draft of the dissertation before I left Houston, and went into on active duty in the United States Army, which in the September of '65. But the draft was not anywhere near complete, and I ended up revising the last chapter, which was 20 pages, and suddenly it became, 3 or 4 chapters and 100 and some odd pages.
Okay.
The dissertation underwent a number of revisions, and in some ways, it in response to rejection letters from university presses. The University of Texas sent me an anonymous review of the dissertation by somebody. To this day, I don't know who. Bless his or her heart, though, because, and I mean that sincerely in this case, because the person said, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to explain what this is about. And I followed those suggestions and said to the editor at Frank Wardlaw at the University of Texas Press, I said, you may see this again, and I'm going to try to expand on these series of questions and queries. And I did. And so I sent it back to Texas, and they then accepted it and published it. There's some irony attached, though, because the paperback edition of the Confederate State of Richmond, published by none other than LSU Press, the first press I sent it to, and the people that turned it down.
Yeah.
Charles East, who was the editor there, said to me privately later, said, I thought I probably should have taken that initially.
Yeah.
I said, well, I wish you had, but it was probably a better book for all my revisions and scramblings.
Yeah.
And I finished the dissertation actually over Thanksgiving when I was in the Army, because my assignment in the Army was to work 24 hours on in this command post and 48 off. And so I got to sleep while I was on duty. They put a cot in the colonel's office, and I slept there until, unless I were called to some emergency. And so I had time to work on the thing, and I worked on it, sent it to Frank, and on Groundhog Day in 1966, yes, I defended got leave from the Army, went to Houston, defended the dissertation, and that was the final hoop through which to jump.
Okay.
And so anyway, Frank sent me a telegram, I think it was. He said, defend Richmond on February 2nd. And so I came to defend Richmond and did so, and got the degree in the mail.
Oh yeah.
I didn't have the opportunity, really. I had to take leave and didn't go to graduation. So I offered the mailman some champagne, and he turned it down. Damn it. But anyway, it was a wonderful thing to have that show up in the mail.
Yeah.
In Wilmington, Ohio.
Yeah, that's a great day, although I know it didn't turn out quite as you maybe had planned. But, well, I think that's a good lesson, too, about submitting your manuscript. I mean, even the best scholars don't luck out that first time. It just takes you a little bit longer, and you had that experience. I had that experience, and it's kind of obviously disappointing when you get the first readers report back, and you might have to go to another press, but you persevered and it worked out for you. Now, UGA, that was your first job and your only job, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in the Army, and the Southern Historical Association met in Memphis, Tennessee, and between eating some incredibly good ribs, I spent that meeting frantically trying to get a job. And in those days, you could get the possibility of getting a job was there as early as November for the following fall.
Okay.
And I don't know who suggested that the University of Georgia might be looking for somebody to do 19th century American history. But I said something to Bill Abbott, William W. Abbott, who was at Virginia most of his career. He edited the Washington papers there. among other things. He was also editor of the William and Mary Quarterly. Bill Abbott, I said almost casually to him, I hear that Georgia might be looking for somebody. He said, well, there's Joe Parks, who was then the Joseph Howard Parks, was then the head of the department at Georgia. He said, let's go see. And so we went over in a crowded lobby, and Bill said, Joe, this is Emory Thomas. He's a good boy. In his best Georgia accent.
Yeah.
And it started, I sat down with Dr. Parks. This is in the Peabody Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. And I think we watched the parade of ducks leave the fountain and go to the elevator to roost for the night. And I talked to Dr. Parks for, 20 minutes to a half hour. And he offered me a job. Oh, actually, what I did was I then sicked people on him. I found everybody I knew and said, could you put in a word for me with Dr. Parks at Georgia? And Frank was there, other people that I had known who in the profession. And in those days, that's the way you got a job. You just talk to people.
Yeah.
And you didn't have committees going through all kinds of pro forma activities. This was sitting down and talking to Dr. Parks while the ducks paraded past us. And I had the job.
Yeah.
And at that time, I really expected to come to Georgia and stay for 3 to 5 years, because that's what people did in those days. And then they moved on to you got a better pay, better money by getting another job.
Yeah.
And that's the way you advanced yourself from assistant professor to an associate professor with tenure. So that's what I assumed we would do when Fran and I left the Army and moved to Athens, Georgia. We, once again, I secured leave and came to Athens, I guess it was in June of 67, and looked for someplace to live. And there weren't many apartments available. By that time, we had 2 children, 2 boys, 3 years apart. Son Emory was 4, and then son John was 1. And we came from Wilmington, Ohio to Athens, Georgia. And we bought a house, which you weren't supposed to do. If you didn't have tenure.
Right.
But we were able to buy it, and we did. And there was some question about the financing of it. Actually, we had to go from one bank to another to get the mortgage loan. And the first one turned us down, and the second one said okay. So there we were.
I'm guessing it was a good investment. Were you kind of right near campus?
Yeah, Athens at the time was a lot smaller. It's roughly maybe 120,000 people now.
Yeah.
At the time, Athens was significantly smaller. I don't know how small, but the university was 16,000, which was huge at the time. It's now 35,000.
Yeah.
Between 35 and 40,000. So, and it was a sort of a plodding deep South state university. We didn't know it, but the president who came the same year we did, and his name is Fred Davison. Fred Davison was 37 and tapped as the new president of the University of Georgia. He had come out of the veterinary school.
Okay.
And people, sort of scoffed at that and said, how can he be a president? Well, he was an incredibly good president. He did lean on the sciences rather heavily in terms of emphasis, money, and the like. But he thought it was okay to have historians and artists, musicians, and other folk to keep the scientists amused. He transformed the University of Georgia into what I consider a first-class state university.
Yeah.
In the same league with the University of North Carolina, with maybe Michigan and Wisconsin. Nowhere near Maine, of course, but that's beside the point. Anyway, I think Georgia has transformed itself while I've been here and really become a first-class institution.
Well,
and I know I'm sure the history department has become far more significant than it was when I came here. I had an office next to our Renaissance Reformation specialist, Joe Barrigan, who said, well, what we have here is Southern historians stacked up like cordwood, because practically every American historian had a research field in Southern history.
Yeah.
And we had some damn good ones. A guy named Rembert Patrick, for example, who was really a giant in the, in the Confederacy. He had some great stuff on Confederate courts and judiciary actions. Justice in Gray was his one of his major books. Dr. Parks, the head of the department, had a biography of Leonidas Polk and Joe Brown, the governor of Georgia during the war. Anyway, we had some good people. Now we have not only good American historians, some really great ones. I have a little contest in my head. Who is the brightest person that I know that I can speak to on a first name and write letters to and things like that? And it's been a number of different people. Gene Genovese for one, Eric Foner for another, have been in that league. Frank, of course, was the first one that I said, this is the brightest person that I know.
Yeah.
Now it's Barry.
Stephen Barry?
Yes.
Okay,
yes, Stephen Barry, I'm trying to think of his name.
Sure.
Who has a number of really exciting books. One on the House of Abraham, about Lincoln's Kentucky relations of the Todd family, his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. Anyway, Steve Barry is probably the brightest person I know besides yourself at this time.
Yeah, he's a great writer.
He is, and he's even better over lunch at the Hilltop Grill.
Well, let me ask you something. You said you have a son named Emory. Is that a family name? It's an unusual name.
Yeah, actually, it's a family name. There was a Methodist bishop named Emory.
Okay.
I don't know where or when, but I think it was in Georgia, because my Thomas family and my grandfather was Emory Howell Thomas. So my name is Emory, which essentially is a tribute to him from my parents.
Okay.
And he was the child of a dirt farmer in Georgia, in Gwinnett County, who came. My grandfather came to the end of a cotton row at age 19, and he put down his bag, which you collected cotton balls in, put down his bag, went up to the house and said, "Mama, I will pick no more cotton ever." And at that point, he went to Atlanta, which was an all-day trip at the time from Gwinnett County, which is now a suburb of Atlanta. And he thought he had a job in Atlanta, but the man says, "Well, no, I got the job I have in mind for you is in Richmond, Virginia. So get on the train and be there." Family legend has it that he showed up in Richmond with 35 cents in his pocket. I don't know if that's true or not, but he did rather well and retired at age 55.
All right, that was part 1 of my talk with Emory Thomas. I hope you enjoyed that. Part 2 will be coming up soon, as soon as I can find the time to edit. It is slow going, and my heart goes out to you podcasters out there. Seems like it's kind of catching up with a good number of people. I mean, I take my time with it, so I'm lucky if I can get 2 podcasts done a month, but some people that I maybe was on their podcast or know them as podcasters, they've really kind of fallen by the wayside, or you might have to wait 6 weeks for a podcast. But I understand it. I mean, you're doing it on your own. You're doing it for free. You got to do everything yourself. So hang in there if you like doing it, and or maybe worried that people aren't getting their free content fast enough. I don't really worry about it, and honestly, I'm trying to get more podcasts that are work related, so I can do it during my work hours and get a 2-for-1 as a historian. But man, it's hard. So some of my favorite podcasts, I don't see them as much as I used to, but it's totally understandable given COVID and having to get back to work and all the other things that are going on now. Times are difficult at so many different levels. So if you're a podcaster, my heart goes out to you. But thank you for the work you are doing. And I hope you will support this podcast by listening and telling people. And you can also buy my book, Marching Masters, Slavery Race in the Confederate Army During the Civil War. Have not sold a book in a while, but would make me feel better if you could buy a copy or send it to someone that wants it, or tell someone about it who might be interested. That would be great. Been watching a lot of baseball, which has been keeping away from podcasting, and the Red Sox have been having a very strange year, a lot of ups and downs. It's been a real roller coaster. They won last night big, but they've been beating the easy teams to beat and not doing so well against the better teams such as the Yankees and the Rays and Houston. I don't know if they have to play Houston again. I hope not, but they got 7 more games with the Rays, so they're going to have a hard road ahead. At least one of those series will be at home. You just never know what to expect on so many nights, and they've lost some real heartbreakers. So in some ways, it is the best of the Red Sox, the new Red Sox, and the worst of the old Red Sox. The frustrating, slow, base-to-base, overwhelmed with hitting, but not having much pitching Red Sox. It's been a schizophrenic experience with them, but some long games recently. So I've been staying up late, even with the fast-forward option on the MLB app now. It's tough to finish those games in a reasonable amount of time. All right, I hope you are doing well as the summer is waning. Avoid the COVID out there, and good luck with everyone dealing with school this semester. All right, I will be talking with you soon. Take care. Bye.